So today we're going to make some paleo chocolates, one of my favorites, and we're going to start with some coconut oil. Here are two different brands that I get. The key to coconut oil is it needs to smell sweet, and there are some really cheap brands out there. You want to stay away from those. And I also sometimes will use cacao butter, raw cacao butter. The difference between using coconut oil and cacao butter is cacao butter you can store the chocolate at room temperature. Still kind of melts a little bit, but at coconut oil, when it gets above 77 degrees, it's melting. And so I store it in the freezer. So the other thing that we're going to need is some raw cacao powder. Now there's a big difference between raw cacao powder and cocoa powder. Cacao has not been heated, and because of that it doesn't get the bitter taste, and it's a whole lot better. Plus there are tons of antioxidants and wonderful nutrients in this. So it's a little bit more expensive, quite a bit more expensive, but it's well worth it. And then we're also going to need some maple syrup. That's what we use to sweeten it. I like mine very dark, so I don't use very much of that. And then we also use sea salt. That kind of brings out the flavor. I usually will do things like putting almonds in it. That tastes pretty good. And sometimes I'll put some essential oils. Like today we're going to use a little bit of wild orange. It gives it kind of an orange chocolate. I like also to put mint in. And sometimes I like it just plain. So we're going to use 3/4 of a cup of coconut oil. And we just kind of put it in there. And then we're going to just heat it up. Not really heat it, but just let it come to melting temperature. We don't really want it hot. Coconut oil isn't going to be affected with heat, but the cacao powder will. You'll lose some of the nutrients. So now we're just going to put this in like a homemade double boiler. So I have 3/4 of a cup of coconut oil in here melted. It's not hot, it's just melted. So we're also going to put 3/4 of a cup of raw cacao powder in. This part you just need to stir, and because the coconut oil isn't hot, it's just warm. It takes a while for the raw cacao powder to get to a place where it's all mixed in really good, so it just takes a while to stir it. Okay, so if you use 3/4 of a cup of coconut oil and 3/4 of a cup of raw cacao powder, what I do is use just less than 1/4 of a cup of pure maple syrup. Then you just dump it in there and stir it up really good. So once you put the maple syrup in, then you just have to stir it for a bit and just make sure that it all mixes in really well. And then we have to start cooling it. To speed up the cooling process, we just put it into another double boiler type thing, except for now the water is cold, and that's just going to cool this down. You don't want to take it cold, and you want to keep stirring it the whole time because you don't want it to cake up on the sides. You want it to just become an even mixture. And the reason for this is the maple syrup will actually separate from the oil. And so if it's not stirred all the time, the maple syrup will just go to the bottom, and the top of when you start pouring it will be really bitter, and the bottom part, well, they won't work because it's just maple syrup. So the key to this part is while we're pouring it, we got to keep it stirring so that the maple syrup doesn't settle to the bottom. So I kind of stir it and then pour in like that. Ideally, I don't make a mess though. So at first I told you I was going to use wild orange to flavor this. I changed my mind and I'm actually going to use peppermint. And so what we're going to do is we're just going to put a few drops, probably about 3 or 4 drops, and then we're going to taste it and make sure that it's got just the right amount. You don't want to put too much. There's 5 drops. And then we just stir it up really good. So we have about a 1/2 cup of chocolate mixture left. And so I used about 9 drops of peppermint oil, and it seems to be just perfect. What I do is now I just put a little bit of sea salt on the top, and that brings out the flavor of the chocolate a little bit better, and it just makes it taste better. So now we're just going to put them in the freezer and wait for them to be all set up. Okay, so we just barely took these out of the freezer. And so they're all set up, and because these really cool silicone molds, you just kind of plop them onto a plate like that. Come on. And now the best part is you get to eat them.